It was a crisp autumn morning in Savannah, Georgia, when the phone rang in the small wooden house where Henry Collins lived. At 69, he spent his days tending his garden and writing letters to his grandchildren. What he hadn't expected was the call from the law firm of Whitmore and Price. The lawyer's voice was dry but held a restrained urgency. "You were named in Charles Whitmore's will," he said. Henry let the phone slip through his hands, a shiver running down his spine. Charles Whitmore, the cotton tycoon, the same man his mother had claimed for decades was his real father, though never with proof. It was impossible, or was it? The years of silence now screamed at his memory, and, without understanding why, tears began to stream down his face. Before I continue, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, for we can never lose faith in God, for He will never abandon us, for His love is eternal and infinite. I also want to take this opportunity to ask that you like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me a lot, thank you. Now, let me tell you how all this unfolded, because what happened next, no one could have predicted. 2 days later, Henry took an interstate bus to the Whitmore mansion, located on the banks of the Mississippi River. The estate was like an old painting, imposing but tired. Charles's death at 87 shook the town, though few truly knew the man behind the name. Henry arrived shyly, with sweaty palms, dressed in his best shirt. He was greeted with looks that mixed surprise, contempt, and confusion. The lawyer, Mr. Price, asked everyone present to go to the library, a room that looked like a set from an old movie. In the center of the table sat an envelope sealed with red wax. "This is the last will and testament of Charles Whitmore," he announced. The silence was almost sacred until he broke the seal and began to read. "I leave all my assets, properties, and investments to Henry James Collins, for he is, with all my soul, the son I have never been able to publicly acknowledge." A murmur ran through the guests, and a woman fainted at the back of the room. Henry felt his legs weaken. Him? The heir to a fortune estimated at over $30 million? It was as if the world had turned upside down. The Bible says that those who are humbled will be exalted, and in that moment, Henry felt that God saw him. But not everyone there shared that sentiment. In the corner of the room, a man in a dark suit stood up, his eyes blazing. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice thick with anger. "I am the legitimate son of Charles Whitmore, and I have proof." The silence turned into a whirlwind of whispers and glances. Henry turned slowly to face the stranger. He had no idea who this man was, but what he said next would change everything. His name was Andrew Miller, and according to his own story, he had been adopted as a baby and raised in a small town in rural Arkansas. His adoptive mother had told him on her deathbed, "Your father was a powerful man, named Charles Whitmore." Andrew had spent 20 years searching for answers. And now, here he was, ready to claim what he believed was rightfully his. Henry didn't know whether to feel anger, fear, or pity. The lawyer urged calm and promised that everything would be investigated. "We'll order DNA tests and review documents," Mr. Price said, his face worried. Meanwhile, Henry was allowed to remain in the mansion. And it was there, in the old East Wing, that he discovered a photograph hidden behind a painting. It was his mother, next to Charles Whitmore. The photograph was old, faded, but it left no doubt. The two smiled like a couple in love. Behind the image, a handwritten date, December 1957. It was the exact month of Henry's birth. His heart pounded, but something about that smile made him uneasy. There seemed to be sadness in his mother's eyes, as if she were hiding something terrible. That night, Henry couldn't sleep. He paced the dark mansion as if in a maze of memories that weren't his own. In the library, he found a leather-bound diary. It belonged to Charles. The pages spoke of business, politics, and regrets. "I made mistakes that will haunt me to the end of my days. But I loved that boy, even from afar." At the bottom of the diary, a folded sheet of paper lay as if hastily put away. It was a letter, written by Charles, never sent. "My dear Henry, if you ever read this, I hope you will forgive me." The words became difficult to read, blurred by a drop of water or perhaps a tear. "I wanted to protect you, but I was a coward." This was more than a clue. It was a plea for forgiveness. Meanwhile, Andrew was working behind the scenes. He hired private investigators and searched for forgotten documents in old registry offices. He seemed determined. But there was something strange about his story. The timelines didn't match. His supposed biological mother had never been registered with any Savannah hospital. And a neighbor from the time, now 91, brought a shocking revelation. She claimed to have seen Charles leave her house in the middle of the night with a woman who wasn't Henry's mother, but rather a housekeeper, known for having a secret affair with her boss. What no one knew was that this woman had become pregnant, but the baby had died at birth. The town hushed up the scandal. But if it were true, who was Andrew? The mystery deepened. With each new discovery, more questions arose. One open cycle after another. Henry began to suspect that Andrew wasn't after the truth, but only the inheritance. And one morning, he found his room ransacked. Someone was looking for something. Perhaps Charles's letter? Perhaps the diary? The tension inside the mansion was almost palpable. Staff whispered in the hallways. Henry no longer even trusted his lawyer. He began to wonder if it was all just an old game. Like Job, he felt he was being tested. But unlike Job, he had a choice: fight or give up. And then, on the day he would have turned 70, Henry received a manila envelope in the mail, with no return address. Inside was a copy of a DNA test. Andrew's name wasn't listed as Charles's biological son. But even stranger, Henry's mother's name was listed as sole legal guardian. It was an adoption document. Had Henry been adopted? But why? And when? And by whom? Was it possible it was all a big lie? Or was this the truth Charles had tried to hide his entire life? Henry knelt, Bible in hand, asking for answers. And as if in a whisper, he felt his mother's presence saying, "Not everything that seems true is justice." Upstairs, Andrew received a mysterious call. "He's almost giving up," he said into the phone. "But if he finds the second will, we're doomed." A second will. Was there another document hidden somewhere in the mansion? The next morning, Henry decides to explore the attic, a dusty, forgotten place. And among old boxes and torn photo albums, he finds something that changes the course of history forever. The morning after his discovery in the attic, Henry barely had time to breathe. Fog covered the fields around Whitmore Mansion, as if the sky were hiding something it didn't want revealed. As he went down to breakfast, one of the servants warned him, "There's a man at the back door. He said he needs to speak with you. But he doesn't look like anyone." Henry frowned. He approached the gray back door, the one that was rarely used. The man waiting there had deep-set eyes, disheveled gray hair, and a worn overcoat. But what stood out most was the leather briefcase in his left hand. "Henry Collins," he asked in a thick southern drawl, "I have something that will change everything. But we need to talk, alone." Henry hesitated, but something in the man's tone convinced him. They took the conversation to the old greenhouse, a place of glass and silence where Charles used to grow orchids. The man introduced himself as Elias Bennett, a former family servant. He said he had served the mansion for nearly 20 years, and that he had mysteriously disappeared after a fight with Charles. "Now you'll understand why." Elias opened the briefcase with trembling hands and revealed a stack of aged papers, newspaper clippings, and 2 photographs. One of them showed Charles holding a baby, but it wasn't Henry. This is the son he never wanted to admit. He was born from an affair with the maid's daughter, and he was taken away, against his mother's will. Henry felt his stomach churn. What Elias was saying, was it possible? The man continued, "This baby survived. He grew up, and I am the one who raised him, hidden, protected, threatened." The second photograph was recent. It showed Andrew, very young, perhaps 18, standing next to Elias in a rural church. He is Charles's son, yes. But he was used. Henry fell silent. The truth was shattering like broken glass. Who was the victim? And who was the imposter? Elias revealed more. Charles knew about his lost son, but didn't want any scandal. He paid to cover up the birth and ordered the child sent far away. But the mother despaired and sought out Elias. "I swore I would protect the boy, and that's why I left." Henry looked at the man in front of him and wasn't sure if he believed him. But deep down, a voice whispered, "Something isn't right. The Bible says, 'You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free.'" "But sometimes the truth hurts," Henry asked. "So Andrew knows all of this?" Elias shook his head. "He knows some of it. But now, others want to use his name to take what isn't theirs." And then, Henry understood. This story was much bigger than an inheritance. It was about redemption, about ancient lies, and present dangers. That night, Henry returned to the library, where Charles usually wrote on his typewriter. Among the drawers, he found an envelope sealed with the initials CW inside, an unfinished letter, as if written in haste and forgotten. "If you're reading this, it's because the truth found you before its time." Elias was the only one who knew. The paper ended there. Elias's name, once again. It was no coincidence. Henry began to piece things together. Perhaps Elias wasn't just an informant, but the missing link in all of this. Andrew, on the other hand, seemed increasingly unstable. He tried to speed up the legal process, pressured his lawyer, and even spoke in interviews with local newspapers. "The true heir wants justice," he said. But Elias had a warning. "Henry, someone is lying. And it's not me." He believed Andrew was being manipulated by people who wanted to destroy Charles's legacy, perhaps even by former family enemies. And then he revealed something even more shocking. The will read at the funeral was not the only one. Elias claimed to have seen Charles write another will weeks before his death, a document kept secret, which corrected the mistakes of the past. What's more, he said the document had been hidden inside a very special object, an antique pocket watch, which Charles wore every day and was buried with him. This revelation shook everything. If true, Charles's true desire lay 6 feet underground. Henry needed to act. But how could he convince someone to open a tomb? The idea seemed absurd, even blasphemous. He prayed silently that night, asking for guidance. And he remembered the book of Ecclesiastes. There is a time for everything, even to uncover the secrets of the heart. The lawyer, when confronted, turned pale. He denied knowing about any second will. But his look betrayed nervousness. Henry sensed something was hidden there. And more than ever, he wanted to discover the truth. Elias warned him, "You need to trust me. But you also need to be prepared. There are people who would do anything to prevent this." Days later, the doorbell rang at 5 in the morning. An anonymous envelope had been left at the main gate. Inside, a single sheet of paper with letters cut from newspaper. "If you open the tomb, you won't come out alive." The game had changed. Now, it wasn't just about money. It was about real danger. Henry went to the local police station and filed a report. The sheriff, a trustworthy man named Dwight Harper, promised to investigate. But he asked for discretion. This town thrives on reputations and old ghosts. If this story is true, it could unearth more than a will. The words lingered in Henry's mind for days. Meanwhile, Andrew began acting strangely. He began avoiding Elijah, refusing private conversations, and always seemed to be accompanied by 2 men. Henry sensed something had changed in him, or someone was changing him. It was then that he decided he needed to dig deeper. He needed to return to the tomb. The following weekend, accompanied by Elias and with the local judge's authorization, after much insistence and evidence, Henry secured the order to exhume Charles Whitmore's body. On that cloudy morning, everyone was there: the lawyer, the sheriff, Andrew, and Henry himself, his heart racing. When the coffin was opened, everyone held their breath. The pocket watch was there, still clipped to Charles's jacket. Elias, wearing gloves, carefully picked it up. He opened the lid, and there it was, a folded piece of paper, sealed with blue wax. The second will, the final document. But before they could read it, one of the men accompanying Andrew drew a gun. Chaos ensued. Henry was knocked to the ground. Elias tried to protect the will, but the armed man pushed him away. It was the sheriff who reacted, with precision, and disarmed the criminal. "The inheritance is not worth your soul," he shouted. The will was saved, but everyone knew that was just the beginning. When the document was finally read, another twist emerged. Charles left his entire fortune not to Henry, nor to Andrew, but to a charitable foundation for orphan children. My children were victims of my cowardice. May others not be. A silence fell over the room. No one expected this. Andrew ran out, shouting that he would sue everyone. Elias wept. Henry just closed his eyes. The mansion, the land, the millions, now had a new owner, fatherless children. And, deep down, perhaps this was how Charles sought redemption. But there was still one last letter. An envelope, with Henry's name on it. Inside, words that would change his life forever. After the reading of the second will, the mansion fell into an eerie silence. The days passed slowly, as if time hesitated to move on. Henry decided he couldn't leave yet. Something inside him told him there were still secrets in that old house. And one rainy afternoon, he returned to the attic, the same place where he had found the first clue. Climbing the creaking steps, carrying only a flashlight and his Bible in his pocket, Henry took a deep breath. The smell of old wood and forgotten memories enveloped him. He moved some boxes until he reached a trunk locked with rusty chains. The padlock, surprisingly, was open. Lifting the lid, he saw yellowed envelopes, with his mother's name handwritten on them. There were letters, dozens of them, organized by year, tied with a blue bow. Some were open, others still sealed. The first one Henry read was dated 1956. "My dear Rose," it began. It was Charles's handwriting. "If the world knew how much I love you, I would lose everything. But not to love you would be to lose my soul." Henry couldn't hold back the tears. For the first time, he felt his mother had been more than a sad memory. She had been loved. Deeply. Truly. But why had Charles never acknowledged her? And why had he hidden those letters in the attic? What else had been silenced over time? He continued reading, his heart pounding. Some letters spoke of plans to run away together. Others of fear. Charles said his family would never accept the relationship. "They would kill me socially if they knew I loved a dark-skinned woman of humble origins." Henry stood still. His mother was black. And Charles, a white aristocrat from the South. The weight of the truth fell like thunder on his shoulders. The Bible says that there is nothing covered up that will not be revealed. And there was the proof. Their story was erased by the shame of a hypocritical society. But love survived in the hidden words. Each letter was like a heartbeat that never stopped beating. Henry hugged that bundle of paper like one would hug his own parents. It was then that he found a different envelope. Thicker, with gold edges. Inside was a letter not from Charles, but from Rose herself. "Henry, if you ever read this, it will be because the truth has found you. I did everything to protect you. Everything." The letter went on to reveal that she knew about Andrew, and that he was not Charles's son. Rose explained that Charles had an affair with a high-society woman, who became pregnant but suffered a miscarriage. Her parents, wanting to avoid scandal, adopted a baby from an orphanage, Andrew, and pretended he was their biological grandson. The story was sold to the press and to Charles himself, who believed the lie. Rose found out, but was silenced. She was threatened. They said that if she told the truth, they would take Henry from her. So she walked away, disappeared, and raised her son alone, away from the eyes of the world. "I never regretted it, Henry. You were my greatest gift. And God is my witness. Your father loved you." Henry fell to his knees on the attic floor. The world spun. But what hurt most was knowing that his mother died with this weight on her chest. He took all the letters and went down to the library, determined to show them to the lawyer. Mr. Price, upon seeing them, was silent for several minutes. "This changes everything, but it could also put a lot of people in danger." He confessed something surprising. He had also received an anonymous letter weeks before Charles's death. Inside, a warning: the inheritance must remain in the shadows. As Henry digested all this, something even stranger happened. One of the mansion's staff appeared with an old music box, which had been found among Rose's personal belongings. It was a melody Henry recognized instantly. His mother used to sing it to him before bed. Inside the box was a secret compartment with a tiny key. But what did it open? Remembering the trunk in the attic, Henry ran there. But he had already opened that one. The key didn't fit there. After hours of exploring, he found a false panel in the old closet in the west wing. Inside, a small, almost invisible safe. The key fit perfectly, and upon opening it, he found a cassette tape. The handwritten label read, "Rose, Confession." Using an old tape recorder, he listened to the tape. It was his mother's voice, soft but firm. "If anyone hears this, it's because I can't talk anymore. I've kept too many secrets, and I can't die without telling." She confessed that she knew where Charles's original will was, and that it had been changed by someone in the family. The tape ended with a silent cry. "Forgive me, my son." Henry felt the weight of generations bearing down on him. Hidden secrets, silenced letters, convenient lies. All to protect a legacy tainted by ego and fear. But also by love. And then, he decided, he would seek justice, not with revenge, but with truth. He knew the journey wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Andrew reappeared that same night. Furious. "You're trying to steal everything from me," he shouted. Henry, for the first time, looked him in the eye and said, "You're not my enemy. But you're not my brother either." The tension rose. Andrew tried to take the letters by force. But Mr. Price, now on Henry's side, intervened. "These documents will be turned over to the courts. We will clear Rose's name. And Charles's." For the first time, Andrew seemed to hesitate. Perhaps doubt had finally reached his heart. But before he could answer, the lights in the mansion went out. Everything went dark. And outside, footsteps. Someone had cut the power and entered through the back. Henry, Elias, and Mr. Price locked themselves in the library. With the letters, with the tape, and with the truth. Outside, voices murmured, "Take the documents. No one must know." The mansion became a silent battlefield. And Henry, a guardian of a legacy he never asked for. But there was one more thing. Next to the tape, in the music box, there was also a name written on a piece of paper, Mary Ann Whitmore. Henry didn't know who she was. But the name sounded familiar. It was like an echo from the past, about to resurface, and with it, the final piece of this puzzle. The name Mary Ann Whitmore echoed in Henry's mind like a distant bell. He rummaged through the old family album, stored on a forgotten shelf in the east wing of the mansion. There she was, Mary Ann, Charles's younger sister. Sweet smile, wistful gaze. But something was off. Mary Ann had disappeared from society at 22, without a trace. According to newspaper reports at the time, she stepped away for mental health reasons. But Elias, who had worked at the mansion for decades, knew a different story. She was institutionalized, because she knew too much. Henry felt a chill. Did Mary Ann know about Rose? About Andrew? About the will? Elias revealed that before disappearing, Mary Ann had given something to the house butler, a sealed envelope. This clue led Henry to seek out the former butler, Jacob Fields, now 94 and living in a nursing home in Charleston. The old man, lucid despite his age, fell silent upon hearing the name Mary Ann. After a few minutes, he murmured, "She was the purest soul in that house, and the most wounded." And then, as if unearthing a sacred secret, he handed Henry an aged letter. It was a simple but direct note. "Charles, if you don't tell the truth, I will. Henry is your son. The test has already been done. He's with Nurse Margaret." Henry's heart raced. A DNA test. Had it already existed? But why had it never been revealed? And where was that nurse? The cycle of secrets seemed endless. But Henry knew he was closer to the truth than ever. The search for Margaret led Henry to a small town in Alabama. There, in a modest house, he met a blind woman with a soft voice who recognized him simply by his touch. "You're Rose's son, aren't you?" She smiled. "I've waited decades for this moment." Margaret confirmed, yes, Charles had Henry tested his DNA when he was 6. But he never told anyone. The test came back positive. Charles was in shock. He loved his mother, but he didn't know how to face the world. He asked me to destroy the results, but I couldn't. Margaret revealed that she hid the envelope inside the cover of a Bible, which was now stored in her basement. God knew this day would come. And there, between the pages of Psalms, was the answer of a lifetime. Henry held the paper as if it were fire. His hands trembled. His name, next to Charles Whitmore's. Compatibility, 99.9%. The truth, finally, laid bare. He thanked Margareth with a tight hug and a soft prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for not letting me give up." But deep down, he knew this document was worth more than gold, and that there were people willing to do anything to keep it from being revealed. On the way back to the mansion, Henry noticed he was being followed. A black car with tinted windows was following the same route. When he stopped at a gas station, the car disappeared, but the tension remained. Upon arriving, he found Elias pale-faced. "They broke in while you were away. They ransacked everything. They're desperate." The question was, who they? Attorney Mr. Price confirmed that someone had tried to break into his office as well. This isn't just an inheritance dispute anymore. It's a power struggle. Andrew, for his part, had disappeared. Dropped off the radar. But someone had seen him meeting with members of the older Whitmore family, the ones who never accepted Rose's name being linked to the mansion. The Bible says that the plans of the wicked will be frustrated. And Henry held in his hands their greatest frustration, the truth. With the DNA test, his mother's letters, and the audio tape, he had an arsenal against the lies. But something still bothered him. Why had Charles never had the courage to admit everything in life? Why had he let Henry live in doubt for so long? And then Elias told the last part of the story. Charles had planned to go public on his 90th birthday. A press event, where he would announce that Henry was his only biological son. But someone in the family discovered the plan. And stopped him. He died a week before the event. Officially, it was a heart attack. But some say he was poisoned. Henry was in shock. The will, the tape, now this suspicion. It all fit together like a dark puzzle. Charles had tried to do the right thing, but he had been silenced, like so many before him. And now, it was up to Henry to finish what his father started. But he knew he couldn't do it alone. And that's when he received an unexpected call. It was Marianne. Alive. Hidden for decades, living under another name in New Mexico. "I hear you're uncovering everything. We need to talk." She refused to give details over the phone, but promised to hand over evidence that would bury the Whitmore family's lies once and for all. Henry traveled there, and what he heard changed everything. Marianne recounted that the Whitmore family patriarchs created a pact to keep the inheritance within a pure lineage. Any racial scandal, any child born out of wedlock, would be erased from history. That's why they had her committed. That's why they threatened Rose. That's why they tried to destroy Henry. But now, she wanted everything out in the open. She handed Henry a wooden box filled with tapes, photos, and a diary. Evidence connecting the city's elite to a system of lies that had lasted nearly a century. "It's time to break this curse," Marianne said. "The truth sets you free, but it also hurts. Be prepared." Henry thanked her with tears in his eyes. He felt God had given him a mission. Upon returning to the mansion, he found the property surrounded. Police, lawyers, journalists. The news had leaked: false will, hidden child, and family conspiracy. It was the beginning of the end for the Whitmores. But also, the beginning of a new story. Henry walked to the front door with the documents in hand. He would face it all, for the memory of his mother. In court, days later, he presented the DNA test. The judge, a serious woman named Meredith Clark, interrupted the hearing to review the evidence. Hours later, the verdict came down. Henry was Charles Whitmore's only legitimate heir. What's more, the falsified will would be investigated as criminal fraud. Shouts erupted in the courtroom. Andrew broke down. And just when everything seemed resolved, the judge called for silence. There is still something to be clarified. An envelope had been left anonymously in the court registry. Inside, a video. It showed Charles, already ill, recording a confession. "If something happens to me, it wasn't God who took me, but rather those who want to silence me." The court fell silent. The weight of the truth fell like a thunderbolt. The investigation into Charles's death was reopened. Several family members' names were on the radar. But Henry rejected any desire for revenge. "Let God judge. I just want peace." He donated half of his inheritance to the foundation established by Charles in his second will, and the other half he would use to restore dignity to the story that had been buried for so long. But there was one last envelope, one Marianne had given him, sealed with the instruction, "Open only when you are ready to know the whole truth." Henry hesitated for days, until, one autumn afternoon, sitting on the old porch swing at the mansion, he decided to open it. And what he read would forever change everything he thought about himself. The envelope Marianne handed Henry looked ordinary, but its contents were anything but. Inside was a small, red-covered notebook with worn edges and a smell of old paper. In bold letters, it read, "Margareth, Personal Diary." The same Margareth who had kept the DNA test. But this diary was earlier. Much earlier. The first few pages began with simple accounts of the routine at the local Savannah hospital, where she worked as a nurse in 1957. Today, a healthy baby boy was born at 3:14 a.m. His mother, Rose, was exhausted but smiling. Henry stopped reading, his heart heavy. "I was reading about the birth itself. Written by someone who was there." But what happened next chilled her spine. There was tension in the hallways. Charles Whitmore appeared discreetly, accompanied by an influential man, his older brother. "He didn't want to be seen. He sent for me." Margareth recounts being taken to a secluded room. There, Charles begged for discretion. He was shaking. He was crying. He said the child was his, and that everything would go wrong if anyone found out. He handed me an envelope with money. He asked me to put a stranger's name on the birth certificate. He said it was to save the baby's and the mother's life. But I couldn't. Margareth decided to register her mother's real name, Rose. She left the father's space blank. It was my way of not lying. But I regretted it, because all hell broke loose soon after. Margaret describes days of persecution, anonymous letters, threatening phone calls. The Whitmore family accused her of destabilizing the legacy. A lawyer appeared, offering money and silence. But she refused. "I knew that one day this child would seek answers, and I wanted her to know that someone tried to do the right thing." Henry closed his eyes. Every line in that diary hurt like a knife. Halfway through the notes, a shocking revelation. There was another birth that night. A wealthy white woman lost her baby a few hours later. The doctors couldn't save it. Word spread, and Mrs. Whitmore arrived with a terrible plan. Henry nearly dropped the diary. Everything was beginning to connect. It was Andrew's story. Margareth reported being called in a hurry by a nurse upstairs. They were arranging a replacement. Rose's baby would be taken as the rich woman's child, and another baby, adopted, would be given to Rose. A human exchange, to save reputations. But something went wrong. Rose woke up and fought with all her might. She screamed, "Give me back my son!" The confusion was so great that the plan was interrupted. Rose managed to hold Henry in her arms. But the adopted baby had already been registered as the son of the wealthy family. This baby was Andrew. Both were raised with crossed identities. A divided truth. A switched legacy. Margareth ends this section of the diary with a sentence Henry would never forget. One was born with love, the other with lies. The Bible says that, "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven." Henry felt that, finally, the moment of truth had arrived. The inheritance, the millions, or the mansion no longer mattered. What mattered was giving a voice to those who had been silenced. Rose, Margaret, even Charles, who had tried and failed. But now, there was someone willing to go all the way. Over the next few days, Henry organized everything with Elias and Mr. Price. The nurse's diary was digitized, authenticated, and delivered to Judge Clark. When she read it, she called for a new hearing. This court needs to reevaluate not only the heritage, but the history of this city. And before the packed courtroom, Margareth, although blind, was called to testify. Her voice trembled, but her memory was unwavering. She recounted every detail of that night, every face, every decision. The room fell silent. Henry, in the back seat, wept. Andrew didn't show up, but his lawyers were there. They tried to invalidate the diary, but the judge firmly replied, "When a woman keeps the truth for nearly 70 years, it's because she knew no one else would." After the hearing, the story hit the newspapers. Headlines across the country: "A trapped inheritance, the babies of the Dark Knight. The Whitmores' tarnished legacy." And, perhaps most importantly, the woman who silenced the powerful with a diary. Margaret became a symbol of courage, Henry of dignity, and Andrew disappeared. But Henry still felt empty. The mansion, now his, seemed too heavy. And it was while walking through the garden, where his mother loved to sit, that he found an envelope hidden in a hole in the ancient oak tree. It was from Rose herself. "If you ever read this, it's because you won. They didn't let your story be erased. I am with God, and with you." Those words healed a wounded soul. He built a memorial in honor of his mother. A stone bench with a simple inscription, "Rose Collins, love stronger than silence." There, she prayed every day, asking for strength, forgiveness, and wisdom. A verse she repeated often came to mind: "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And indeed, at that moment, she lacked nothing. But the story wasn't over yet. While reviewing the papers of the foundation created by Charles, Henry discovered a curious detail. There was a co-founder. A woman. Name: Mary Ann Whitmore. She had been involved in the foundation's creation, but was removed months later. Why? The answer lay in a document hidden in a safe deposit box at the family bank. Inside the safe, besides old contracts and jewelry with no emotional value, was a notebook with financial records. And a letter, sealed with the family crest. Mary Ann wrote to Charles, "If you won't protect Henry, I will. And if they take me away, I'll know it was you who was lost." Another piece. Another exposed wound. Henry now held the key to exposing the entire lineage of abuse by the local elite. But at the same time, he carried the responsibility of turning that pain into something good. Elias suggested an idea: transform the Whitmore mansion into a shelter for abandoned children. Then this house will finally be a real home. The proposal thrilled the town. The newspapers called it a historic redemption. Henry, now 70, felt at peace in his heart. But something still called to him. Deep in the library, beneath the floorboards, he found a hidden compartment. Inside, an envelope in Charles's handwriting. If Henry finds this, it means he survived. He opened it, and found the greatest secret of all. The envelope hidden beneath the library floor was heavy, both in content and meaning. Inside was a letter from Charles, written in a shaky hand. "Henry, if you found this, it's because you resisted everything. I failed you, but I want you to know, someone very close to me betrayed me. The man I trusted with my truth sold my silence." The letter mentioned a name that completely chilled Henry: Mr. Price, the family lawyer. The one who seemed loyal, who guided him, who had been by his side since the funeral. Charles claimed that, in exchange for a millionaire sum, Mr. Price agreed to hide the second will for years. "He promised me he would hand it over when I died. But then, he disappeared with it." Henry felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. The man he called an ally was the same one who had prevented the truth from coming out. The letter continued, "He thought I didn't know, but I hired a private investigator. His name was Darrell Thompson. He found out everything. But he mysteriously disappeared before he could hand me the evidence." That last sentence set off a red flag in Henry. Determined to uncover the truth, he hired a new detective. Darrell Thompson's name was still in the public records. The last known address: an abandoned trailer on the Georgia-South Carolina border. Arriving there, Henry found a chilling scene: broken furniture, burned documents, but one wall concealed a safe. With the help of a local locksmith, the safe was opened. Inside were audio tapes, copies of bank transfers, and recordings of conversations between Mr. Price and members of the Whitmore family. A clear voice said, "With that will out of the way, no one will ever know that boy is the heir." Henry took the recordings straight to Judge Clark. The bomb was about to explode. At the new hearing, the judge demanded Mr. Price's presence. He arrived tense, sweating, without his signature gold-rimmed glasses. When the recordings were played, the silence was piercing. Voice by voice, each lie was revealed. "Make the second will disappear. Keep the boy away until we bury the old man. The money is in the Cayman Islands account." Mr. Price tried to argue. He said he was protecting the family legacy. But the judge cut him off firmly. "You're being charged with fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." Henry watched with a mixture of relief and sadness. That man had smiled at him, hugged him, and at the same time had laid his ruin behind his back. The court was interrupted by protests. Long-time members of the local elite demanded secrecy. But Judge Clark banged her gavel. "This court will not be complicit in legacies built on lies and bought silence." It was justice, finally touching the untouchables. Mr. Price was led away in handcuffs, his head bowed. Henry, for his part, remained standing, Bible in hand. The truth won. But victory also brought dangers. Henry began receiving new threats, anonymous letters, late-night phone calls, slashed tires. Influential figures didn't want any more scandals. And the name, Darrell Thompson, seemed to be a ghost haunting the shadows of power. Elias suggested that Henry leave town for a while. But he refused. "I've been silenced for too long." It was then that Marianne resurfaced with another revelation. She had kept copies of a bribery agreement signed by Charles under duress. The document showed that the family had pressured Charles to hand over part of his fortune to a shell foundation in exchange for silence, and that Mr. Price had been the intermediary in all the transactions. "They turned justice into currency," she said. Henry took everything to the FBI. A federal investigation was launched. With it came arrests, searches, and seizures. But also an even more shocking discovery. Among the documents found in Mr. Price's office was a letter from the family patriarch, Charles's older brother, in which he said, "If Henry ever gets close to the truth, terminate him." Quietly. The tone was clear. That world had no room for mercy. But Henry didn't remain silent. He gave interviews, participated in public hearings, and created a fund with part of his inheritance to investigate legal crimes committed against black families in the American South. "My mother was silenced. I won't allow others to be silenced. The Bible says, 'Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled.'" Henry felt this thirst like a flame, and it drove him. The Whitmore Mansion was renamed House of Light, a center providing legal, psychological, and spiritual support for victims of structural racism and legal manipulation. The once cold hallways now echoed with voices of hope. But not everyone accepted this change. A group of distant, outraged heirs filed a new lawsuit. They wanted to invalidate Henry's inheritance, alleging emotional instability and social pressure. The strategy was clear: try to wear him down, silence him, and discredit him. But Henry was prepared. And with him, thousands of supporters from across the country. Letters began arriving from all corners of the United States. Elderly women, widows, orphans, activists. All with similar stories. Of injustice, of silence, of buried truths. "You're speaking for us, Henry." And then, he realized, what began as a story of inheritance had become a movement. And movements don't die. During a visit to the foundation, an elderly woman approached with tears in her eyes. "Your father saved me from despair in 1973. He gave me shelter when no one else would accept me." Henry embraced her, feeling the cycle of redemption close in his soul. Charles was not only a divided man, he was also a repentant man. And even with so many mistakes, he had planted seeds of goodness. Behind the scenes, new documents emerged. This time, a video hidden in the foundation's vault. In it, Charles spoke directly to the camera. "If anyone ever sees this, know that I tried to make amends. Henry is my son, and the man you see today is better than I ever was." The image shook, but the words were clear as the sky after a storm. Judge Clark closed the case with a firm statement: Henry James Collins is the only legitimate heir, and his legacy is more than material. It is a living testament to faith, resilience, and justice. The court applauded. Journalists wept. And Henry simply closed his eyes and silently thanked God. Because in the end, his mother's love and God's hand had guided everything. But before leaving the courthouse, he received a letter from the authorities. One last clue. A document had been found in a never-opened safe in the basement of the hospital where he was born. A forgotten place, locked for decades. Inside, a logbook and a photo that would reveal the final missing link, with a name no one expected to see. The official envelope bore the seal of the Chatham County Public Records Department. Henry opened it carefully, his fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a small dossier. The cover read, Occurrence Report, Central Station, 1957. It was a police report about a woman who had disappeared the same day Henry was born. She was wearing blue. She was carrying a baby. The name on it made Henry hold his breath. Clara Mae Johnson, missing at 26. She was a hospital employee, a nanny's assistant, and according to the file, the last person seen leaving the maternity ward that night. She was carrying a child wrapped in a white blanket. She seemed nervous. She was crying. What no one knew was that Clara hadn't disappeared. She was hiding. By cross-referencing data with old hospital records, Henry and Elias discovered that Clara had resigned 2 days after the incident. No warning, no resignation. She just vanished. But a marginal note on the document caught their attention. Sighted at train station at 6:15 a.m. wearing sky blue. Departed for Tennessee. The clue was tenuous, but it was all they had. Henry traveled to Nashville with Elias. There, they visited churches, nursing homes, and social institutions. These were days of silent searching, dashed hopes, and continuous prayer. Until, in a humble chapel on the outskirts of town, they met a 92-year-old woman named Clarice. But upon seeing Clara Mae's old photo, she was moved. She was my sister. Clarice revealed that Clara never got over what she saw that night. She said the truth was too big to carry alone. She also said that Clara lived under another name. Martha Green. She had been in a nursing home since 2014, suffering from memory lapses but moments of complete lucidity. Henry went there. Her heart was beating so hard it felt like it was trying to burst out of her chest. In room 214 of the nursing home, a white-haired woman stared out the window. She was dressed in blue. When Henry entered, she turned slowly. She whispered, You're the boy?" He froze. That boy from the hospital, with Rose's eyes. She began to cry. "I've waited my whole life for this moment." Clara, or Martha, tearfully recounted what she experienced that morning. She said she was rushed to the hospital by a nurse. She was quickly handed a swaddled baby. She was supposed to take him to the station, where another woman would pick him up. But something inside her stopped. When she saw the baby's little face, she sensed something was wrong. And she decided to hide him for a few hours until she could understand better. At that moment, Rose woke up and demanded to see her son. The widespread confusion at the hospital prevented a complete exchange. "I disappeared to avoid being killed. They wanted to silence me." Clara lived her entire life carrying this secret, protecting herself with another name, another life. But every time she saw a baby, she cried. "I knew one day he would come find me." Clara revealed a detail that no one knew. The woman leading the exchange plan wasn't the head nurse. She was Charles's older brother's wife, the silent matriarch. She said everything was for the good of the family. That blood didn't matter. What mattered was the name. And it was she who masterminded the entire farce that destroyed lives. Clara handed Henry a box she'd kept for over 60 years. Inside was a white blanket embroidered in blue, Henry. And more, a maternity bracelet engraved with the name, Collins, R. It was the final proof. The baby's identity, the nanny's testimony, the missing link. The decades-long silence finally broken. Henry returned to Savannah with Clara. She was welcomed as a heroine by the new generation, despite the embarrassed silence of some of the local elite. In a press interview, she courageously said, "Lies are fragile. But when told well, they take a long time to fall. Today, I no longer carry that burden." Henry held her hand. "You saved my life," he said. "And my mother's." With that, The court definitively closed the case. With Clara as the key witness, all the documents gathered, and the DNA test, there was no longer any doubt. But Henry felt his journey went beyond the courts. It was time to let the world know what happened, and never again allow other Claras to be silenced. He released a book with the whole story. He called it Blue Dress. The Truth Doesn't Die in the first few weeks. It sold thousands of copies. Invitations for lectures, interviews, and even documentaries began to pour in. But what touched Henry most were the letters from elderly women who said, "I, too, have kept secrets. Now I want to tell them." At the unveiling of the memorial for Rose and Clara, Henry read a passage from the Bible that his mother loved, "Though the fig tree does not blossom, I will rejoice in the Lord." The audience, overcome with emotion, wept. At the altar, an empty chair represented all the women who were never heard. Those who were silenced by shame, by threats, by structure. Clara passed away 2 months after the final hearing. But she departed peacefully, clutching the blanket she'd hidden for so many years. At her funeral, Henry delivered a simple speech. She wore blue, but she carried the weight of the world. And he vowed, before God and everyone present, never again will we allow the truth to be suffocated by surnames and inheritances. But before she died, Clara gave Henry one last letter. "I found something years ago. It was kept in a hospital safe. I never knew what to do with it. But now, it's yours." Inside the envelope was an old will, dated before Henry's birth, and signed by Charles. In it, a surprising promise, an inheritance reserved for someone who had not even been born yet. The will, dated before Henry's birth, left everyone speechless. It was as if Charles already knew he would have a hidden child, and planned to care for him from the beginning. The clause was clear: "If I ever have an heir born out of wedlock, this document shall guarantee his dignity and protection." It was an act of anticipation, but also of guilt. This will was never officially registered, which suggested that Charles kept it to himself. Perhaps out of fear. Perhaps out of hope that one day he would have the courage to admit everything. And once again, Mr. Price's name appeared. He was the one who should have registered the document, but he never did. Now everything made sense. The lawyer's silence had begun long before. As Henry was organizing the documents to make the will public, he received an urgent call. It was from the local hospital. A former Whitmore family employee was hospitalized, and had asked to see him. The name on the file was familiar: Sebastian Whitmore, Charles's older brother. The same man mentioned by Clara, Elias, and even Marianne. The architect of the lie. Entering the room, Henry found himself face to face with a frail, unrecognizable man. His eyes were sunken, his body weakened. But upon seeing Henry, he whispered, "You look like her, like Rose." For the first time, Sebastian showed humanity. He asked everyone to leave, and with a cracking voice, he began to confess everything. "I destroyed my brother's life, out of pride. Just for that." Sebastian said he knew of Rose's pregnancy even before Charles did, and he decided that the child would never be born with the Whitmore surname. The family honor was paramount. He said he hired people to follow Rose, intimidate Margaret, and even buy Clara's silence. But when he saw that Charles was beginning to want to change, he began operating in the shadows. "I was the one who convinced Price to hide the will. I was the one who prevented the complete exchange at the hospital. And I was the one who ordered Darrell Thompson's murder." Henry froze. He'd always known there was something darker to this story. But hearing the confession from the man who masterminded it all was like facing evil head-on. "I did all this, and I never apologized." Sebastian coughed up blood but insisted on continuing. "Charles tried to be better, but I kept him bound by our curse." He said he also bribed parts of the local justice system for years to keep his family untouchable. "We were trained to destroy anything that threatened. Your mother was too much light for this world." Henry wept silently. He wanted to hate him, but he saw only ruin. Old Whitmore held Henry's hand with unexpected strength. "Don't let this family continue building palaces over corpses." He begged him to bring his confession to justice, to hand over everything, and to forgive Charles, because, he said, He was the only one of us who tried to truly love. And before he left, he whispered, "You are the hope of our line." Sebastian died that morning. And with him, the Whitmore elite's last wall of silence. Henry handed over his recording of the confession to the FBI. It was the missing piece. Now the case was becoming historic. Documentaries began to be produced. Congressmen mentioned the case in speeches on legal reform. And the Whitmore name, finally, began to carry a new meaning. But with the truth fully exposed, Henry found himself faced with a difficult decision. Now that he was officially the sole legitimate heir, what would he do with the name? With the companies? With the fortune? He prayed for days. And he felt in his heart that forgiveness was the only answer. "The Lord is my refuge and strength," he repeated softly. And he decided he would end the cycle with love. He publicly announced that he would dissolve the Whitmore conglomerate. The assets would be converted into social initiatives, educational centers, mental health clinics, and projects for the elderly. The family that hid so much will now serve to reveal, care for, and heal. And thus was born Rosa du Sol Foundation, in honor of Rose. "My name doesn't matter," Henry said, "but hers must be remembered." Meanwhile, Andrew, the man who believed himself to be the heir, appeared in public for the first time in months. Visibly distressed, he apologized in a live interview. "I was used, deceived, and then I lost myself. But I want to start over." Henry welcomed him. He forgave him and offered him a job at the foundation. "It's not your fault that you were raised in a lie. You will only be, if you continue to do so." The scene of the two embracing on national television was shared millions of times. It was a symbol of what this story has always been: redemption. The reunion of two men raised by false narratives, but united by the courage to seek the truth. And while many expected revenge, they received compassion. As Jesus said, "Love your enemies." Henry chose love. The Bible Rose kept, with the original will inside, was now on display in the Foundation's museum. Beside it, Clara's blue dress, Margaretha's diary, Charles's letter. All these objects formed a living, touchable timeline that told a story impossible to forget. Women who had been silenced, and who now spoke loudly through the walls. In the Foundation's prayer room, Henry left anonymous notes for visitors. Verses, prayers, blessings. One of them read, "If you're here, it's because you survived. May the peace that reached me also reach you." And these notes went viral, spreading across social media, with thousands of testimonies. People from all over the country felt welcomed there. With each passing day, Henry realized that his mother's story wasn't unique. It mirrored many others. And he decided to expand the mission. He founded foundation chapters in 6 states. He offered scholarships to grandchildren of domestic workers to study law. And he created an active listening project for elderly women to share their stories. Memory can heal, but it needs to be heard. One day, during a ceremony, a woman with a firm voice stood up and said, "I knew your mother. She saved me when no one else would listen." It was another testimony, another seed planted by Rose, harvested by Henry. And he understood that her legacy wasn't a fortune. It was a garden of hope. But inside an old box that arrived in the mail, from Sebastian's old safe, was something unexpected. An envelope. No return address. Inside, a photographic negative, a map, and a note: "What you thought you knew isn't everything. Go to where it all began." And hand-drawn, a symbol only Rose knew. The mysterious envelope came from Sebastian Whitmore's personal safe, now in judicial custody. Henry opened it with cold hands. The map was hand-drawn, with delicate lines. It looked like the outline of the mansion, but there was an X marked where he'd never noticed, the old, abandoned chapel in the back garden. The place where Rose used to pray alone. The symbol drawn in the corner of the map was the same one embroidered on Rose's handkerchief, a rose entwined with an eye. Only she and Henry knew this symbol. It was like a summons, a final conversation. Beside the map, a negative of a photograph that, when developed, revealed something surprising: Charles, kneeling at the chapel altar, with a book in his hands. Henry rushed to the scene. The chapel was in ruins, covered in ivy and silent. But as he moved a loose plank on the altar, he found a secret compartment. Inside, an iron box. Locked. He used the key Clara had given him years before, the same one from the music box. The lock opened with a sharp click. And what was inside was unbelievable. It was a Bible. Aged, dark brown leather. On the opening pages, a handwritten inscription, to Rose. May this word be our light at the end of a tunnel of darkness. It was from Charles. But what lay hidden between the pages of Isaiah was what took Henry's breath away. A third will, dated 2 months before Charles's death. Unlike the others, this document was more spiritual than legal. It contained words of repentance, faith, and a vision of the future. Charles wrote that he wanted to transform his entire fortune into an eternal legacy. This money will never be enough to pay for what I have hidden, but it can be used to illuminate paths. He didn't leave the inheritance to Henry, or to Andrew, but to the kingdom of God. My mansion must be a sanctuary, my possessions distributed to those who suffered in silence, and my name forgotten, so that his may be remembered. Henry read those lines with tears streaming down his face. Charles had finally understood that redemption cannot be bought. It is built. And he wanted to be remembered, not as a patriarch, but as a repentant sinner. At the end of the will was a letter from Rose. Sealed. As if she knew Henry would find it. My son, if you're reading this, you've reached the end. And now, it's up to you. She spoke of how she had silently forgiven Charles. How she prayed every day that Henry would be a light, even in the darkness of the past. Forgiveness is our greatest power. With the new document in hand, Henry reconvened Judge Clark and the Foundation leaders. The third will cannot be legally enforced, she said, but it can be morally enforced. And so, it was decided, all of the Whitmore family's assets would be used to create the Silent Hope Project, with national reach, working in marginalized communities. During the public announcement, Henry quoted Isaiah 61:1, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the oppressed." People wept, applauded, and prayed. The former estate, marked by pain, now became an altar of rebirth. But something remained unclear. Why had Rose never told Henry about this third will? Mary Ann revealed that Rose knew about the document but decided not to tell. She believed you had to choose this path alone. And if you found it, it was because your heart was ready. It was like a living parable. The truth, hidden between the lines, would only be seen by eyes of faith. And Henry had found it. At the right time. In the right place. The Bible was placed back on the altar of the now restored chapel. Along with Clara's blue dress, Charles's letter, and a lit candle. Visitors came from far and wide just to pray there. The place where it all began, and all was revealed. Henry was writing a new book, called The Third Testament, which was already considered required reading in churches, colleges, and social circles. One Sunday afternoon, a little girl approached Henry in the chapel. She carried a flower and said, "My grandmother told your story. Can I leave this here for your mother?" Henry held back tears. The faith his mother had planted was now sprouting in generations she'd never known. And he understood, his role was to multiply that harvest. And it was in this spirit that he created Truth Restored Day, celebrated every September 27th, Rose's birthday. Each year, thousands of women told their stories for the first time. And Henry listened. Because listening was the legacy his mother left. And in that sacred silence, many finally found the peace they sought. But while reviewing the foundation documents, Henry found another letter. A small one, tucked into the envelope with the chapel map. It was from Sebastian, written in shaky handwriting. "If you've made it this far, then there's something you need to know. I've hidden something. Something I've never told you. And something that could change everything again." At the bottom, an address. Deep in Texas. The address in rural Texas led to a dirt road surrounded by fields and silence. Henry went alone, carrying only Rose's Bible and Sebastian's letter. At the gate of the small farm, a middle-aged woman greeted him. "You're Rose's son, aren't you?" Her name was Esther, and the story she would tell would change everything again. Esther revealed that in the 1960s, when she was just a teenager, she lived in a religious institution run by members of the Whitmore family. There, she met a young man named Samuel, quiet, kind, and a lot like Henry. They grew up together, fell in love, but were forcibly separated. And according to her, Samuel was Charles's son. Henry was shocked. Charles had fathered another son, even older, from a relationship with a young music teacher, who was sent away as soon as the pregnancy was discovered. The child was registered under a different name, raised without knowing his origins. Samuel, the true firstborn, the lost heir. He never knew who he really was. Esther said Samuel had died 5 years earlier, the victim of a truck accident. But before he died, he left a diary. In it, he wrote about dreams of an absent father, of a White House surrounded by trees, of a brother he never knew. He felt he was part of something bigger, but he didn't know what. Henry wept. The truth was deeper than he expected. The diary was kept in a simple trunk, and between the pages was a photo of Samuel holding a small boy. "That's his son," Esther said. "Your nephew. His name is Elias." Henry stared at the image as if looking in a mirror. It was like seeing his own reflection years ago. The cycle hadn't ended. It had merely begun again. Esther took Henry to the neighboring town, where Elias lived with his maternal grandmother. When they met, the two embraced as if they had known each other forever. Elias, 12, was curious, sweet, and full of questions. "You're my uncle, so I'm part of this too." Henry took her hands and said, "You're part of the promise. And now it's your time to shine. The Bible says, the promise is to you and to your children after you." Henry saw in Elijah a chance to start over, the right way. He decided to legally adopt the boy, name him Collins, and involve him in the Foundation's activities. "You will grow up knowing who you are, where you come from, and why you were born." It was the beginning of a new generation, redeemed by faith. Together, Henry and Elias started the project Divine Promise, a leadership school for orphan children and descendants of broken stories. The motto was simple: we are not defined by what was taken from us, but by what we choose to build. With that, the Whitmore name, once a burden, became a seed. Of justice, of truth, of purpose. During the first service in the restored chapel, Elias read aloud a passage chosen by Henry. "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to bring you peace and not evil, to give you a future and a hope." Jeremiah 29 verse 11. People wept. Rose's story now guided lives far beyond her own. Henry's last book, Children of the Promise, became a reference for Christian leaders, educators, and judges. It was more than an autobiography. It was a manual for reconstruction. It showed that no matter how much the truth is buried, it flourishes, if watered with faith, courage, and forgiveness. That's what Rose wanted. That's what God always planned. And so it was that, upon turning 75, Henry looked out onto the porch of the old mansion, now a community center, and saw children running, women smiling, elderly people telling stories. And on the wooden swing, Elias read the Bible to a group of visitors. This was the house of silence. Now, it's the house of promise. And the boy smiled. At a national event, Henry was honored as one of the most influential men of the American South. But he refused the titles. He asked only that the certificate be written, Son of Rose, because it was she who, even in silence, cried out with love. It was she who, even in hiding, lit lights that no time or lies could extinguish. In the last years of his life, Henry lived a light life. He planted gardens, wrote letters, and visited prisons and hospitals. His greatest pleasure was telling stories. And when asked how it all began, he would smile. It began with a forgotten woman, a hidden Bible, and a blue dress. It was his way of saying, it began with faith, with courage, with love. But in the last chapter of his personal diary, he wrote a sentence that was engraved on the foundation wall: "Justice taught me the value of truth. But it was love that showed me the path of life." And there, even with everything already revealed, Henry left an open space for new stories, new truths, and new miracles to be found. This story showed us that even when the truth is buried beneath layers of fear, pride, and silence, it finds a way to blossom. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it spans generations. But when it surfaces, it doesn't just liberate, it transforms. And that transformation begins when someone has the courage to say, "I want to know what happened." Henry could have accepted the official version. He could have moved on, silently, as so many had done before him. But something inside him, a living faith, a memory of his mother, a flame of justice, wouldn't let him stop. And thanks to this, not only was his story rewritten, but thousands of others were inspired to be reborn. Now I ask you, how many truths have been silenced in your life? How many times have you felt something was wrong, but were afraid to ask? Or worse, how many stories have you swallowed in the name of peace, when, in reality, it was just fear in disguise? Perhaps today is the day to give voice to all that has been kept hidden. Have you ever felt like Rose, trying to protect others with your own silence? Or like Henry, confused between versions, but with enough faith to seek the light? What if your story is still waiting to be told? What if you're the Rose of your family, or the Henry who will break the cycle? If this story touched your heart, I invite you to reflect. What would you do if you discovered your entire story was built on a lie? What would you choose, revenge or redemption? And most importantly, would you have the courage to transform pain into purpose, as Henry did? I take this opportunity to invite you to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. Not only to support this content, but to continue receiving stories like this, stories that touch, that heal, that awaken. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we turn on lights. And before I close, I pray for you. May God grant you wisdom to see the truth, strength to break the silence, and faith to begin again, even when all seems lost. May you find peace, even in the midst of chaos. Because His love, like roses, never fails.